good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I think the topic of world-class residential real estate is probably one of the most topical subjects in Nairobi, certainly, and in East Africa as a whole. There's been a huge changing landscape in how real estate is viewed, how residential real estate specifically. So I think I'd like to ask Human to kick us off. Human, you have a lot of experience in residential luxury real estate development. Maybe let's talk about the change. Let's talk about how real estate, the residential sector, has moved from what we say conventional to luxury. What does that mean? What has changed?
Thank you, Farhana. And I always tell people that when I grow up and get a proper job, I want to work for Haas Consult one day, because you guys are doing amazing things.
You still can.
So what is, well, maybe first we can start by defining luxury. I think that's maybe just to set us off, because in a market like Kenya, where 20 million shillings is technically high end, right? So you're dealing with, for the majority of the market, it's that's out of reach for 99% of the population. It's then, how do you really define luxury in the space that we work in, where we have properties in our Palm Valley project that are up at $1.2 to $1.5 million, in previous projects up to $4 million. So how do we define that within this market? I think the change, and it also goes to some things that Jason had mentioned in the last panel about the level of livability can be at various stages of the market. It doesn't just have to be at the super high end. But the way that we define luxury is really about freedom. Well, that's my definition, is really around freedom. So it's about freedom from noise. It's about freedom from rush. It's about freedom from compromise. And so when we design our projects, we spend a lot of time on very intricate details. Really, what it comes down to for me and our team is, it's really not about what we build, it's about how people feel inside of what we build. And that's really what luxury is.
That's excellent. I think the notion of freedom is very, very interesting. You said freedom from noise. So that leads me to a question related to, how do you blend luxury in the urban context? We heard in earlier presentations that 60% of the African population will be living in cities by 2050. We've heard that Africa will house 1/3 of the world's population soon enough. We've heard the need for green infrastructure. I think traditionally we all associate green space and quiet with luxury. So how would you balance that out, given the fast-changing urban landscape in East Africa?
Yeah, so when we're creating these residential communities, we're effectively creating what we call a micro-community, right? So we're curating spaces where people can engage. It came a little bit from our hospitality background, where your room in a hotel is your private space, but really it's all the other communal spaces that you create that determines a very large part of your experience within that property. So for Palm Valley, which is set on 20 acres, it's 88 homes, almost about 500,000 square feet of luxury development. We've not only created spaces, but allowed for spaces like libraries. We have an art cafe, we have an art market, very specific sculptured parks and meditation parks, and each one's themed. We have town hall spaces and studios and a spa, and then every level of recreation, from squash courts, paddle, tennis, football. But these are all just spaces until residents move in, and a residential development only becomes residential when the first person moves in, and it's then when you start to see the community take shape. So what our role is effectively just to create spaces that the community can then take as their own, and and um, and actually curate their own experiences. So one thing we're working on now is developing curriculums for the community, for the children, which are bespoke, tailor-made for every child in the community, depending on the age, whether it's sports, activities, or something around younger children and mobility for them and learning for them, so that you either are enhancing or actually even starting some of the younger members of the community on their learning journey. And that's something that people haven't really thought about. I saw a project in Dubai that's added a snow room, or I think it's a snow room. Yeah, they put like snow in a room in this apartment building because they've just run out of amenities to talk about. So they're competing on like ridiculous things now. Whereas what we really believe is the future is looking at the community and now understanding what its requirements are, and education is a big focus on that now.
That's very interesting, because and I think a lot of what you say marks the shift, because traditionally real estate looked at the inside of the unit, and a lot of what I hear you say is now looking at the outside, at the community, at the amenities. And I assume, although I would like you to clarify if that's indeed the case, that a lot of the target market is high net worth individuals. We did say 20 million is the threshold to consider luxury, so is that really true? But if that's the case, what else is your end user looking for? What are their requirements in terms of design, sustainability? What more are they looking for?
So we have a very accomplished architect here who can answer that. But just in terms of my feedback, what they're looking for, again, is a feeling. It's a curated lifestyle experience, and so we talk less and less about the size of the plot. We actually try and avoid that question as much as possible, because it lets us become a little bit more optimized on how we use the land. We rather talk about what you can do with it. So you have these half-acre plots, for example, in Runda, but they're not very well designed, so they don't really have their own personal spaces that you can do things with. In a project like ours, our larger homes might be sitting on a smaller plot than that, about 1/3 of an acre, but you can host 200 people in your own private back garden. And then you have facilities. We've put outdoor dining spaces that can host 30 people on a long marble table, and we just created some, maybe a bit odd, but some interesting experiences. So what people are looking for, I think, is to be impressed. They are now at the stage where the buyers, they are no longer, well, let's not say no longer, they are considerably more sophisticated. Everybody has access to Instagram, everybody has access to BBC lifestyle documentaries about the nicest homes in the world. People have traveled and seen beautiful hotels in Dubai and Miami and all through Europe. So the level of expectation by our clientele is significantly higher than what we would have experienced 10 or 15 years ago. And they know exactly what they're looking for. I don't want to say made the mistake. We've learned a lesson from allowing our buyers to customize to a level that we've been very surprised by. I'm talking about curated stone coming in from Italy for some of the buyers' homes. But we've kind of allowed it because we're allowing this to be a canvas, our project specifically Palm Valley, to be a canvas for actually what people see as their ultimate home. And I think it's the first time that homeowners can act somewhat like developers. It's cost us a lot of time, but the eventual product is going to be very beautiful.
That's excellent. I think that touches on quite a few points, and one of the things you touched on earlier was around sustainability. And Gurmukh, maybe I can address you on this one. You are a very accomplished architect in different spheres. I think there's been a global interest, a global rise on discussions around the green aspects of development, sustainability, how that ties up with ESG goals. Are you able to maybe tell us a little bit about how green building principles are weaving their way into modern day design? What can and should developers do?
Okay, it's a very valid point. I mean, in regards to just not only luxury developments, but any development. If you're looking at, for example, what they've done at Palm Valley, there's a lot of green spaces, and this is picked up in the previous discussion as well. So that helps in, taking water back to the groundwater, refilling our aquifers, making sure that, because currently what's happening is a lot of boreholes are being dug up, we're having the aquifers being drained faster than they can be replenished, and that's a major issue. So that's just one. From a practical point of view, if you're looking at even water systems, heating systems, things like heat pumps are very efficient and very convenient. So they make sense not only from a sustainability point of view, but also from a utility point of view for these kind of developments. Again, for PV, if you're having power cuts and you have kind of off-grid power solutions, that makes a lot of sense. If you have low flow fittings, if you have low VOC paints in your house, it's healthier for you. And that's what a lot of these luxury buyers are looking for. They're very educated, as Human has mentioned. So they are looking for, healthy homes that are efficient. When you turn on your tap, you get hot water, and it's not, costing you an arm and a leg to heat that water. So I think sustainability now is unavoidable. It makes a lot of sense, even from a corporate standpoint or commercial standpoint. If you're investing into good, sustainable solutions, the payback is excellent.
That's very insightful. Maybe I can just follow on with another question related to that. I think we heard earlier from the Knight Frank presentation that sustainability and climate finance is only at 11% of what it should be. What has been your experience in how integrating these design or sustainable design principles can help developers unlock funding from DFIs and other avenues? Okay,
so I think I can see IFC Edge is here as well. So there's certifications like Edge and LEED, which are basically benchmarks, and those would help you unlock better funding opportunities from various DFIs. And in regards to that, it also helps you attract better tenants. So we have seen in our experience that if you're looking at, we're expecting about 9,000 UN staff coming into Nairobi eventually. There's a massive shift towards Nairobi from New York. And a lot of those users or tenants will be looking for spaces that are sustainable, that are secure, have good lighting, good ventilation, and meet some of these certifications. So how would they know that this is sustainable? It needs to kind of meet these certifications, and that helps them sell better. We've seen this for residential, we've seen this also for corporate. LEED certified buildings let faster than none.
That's very interesting, and good to see that end users are demanding higher standards from developers on green aspects of development. And I think tied into green finance is, of course, just conventional development finance. And maybe my question to Bangwani from ABSA, at the forefront of course, a lot of development financing. The traditional way in Kenya, in Nairobi especially, has been that luxury development is funded by off-plan sales. Sorry to all the finance institutions in the house, but that has been the practice here. How do you see the continuing role of off-plan sales in funding luxury finance, luxury development, sorry, and also what are the alternative models you're seeing in the finance space related to residential real estate?
Sure, thank you. So the scenarios we typically see come in three ways. One is where sort of I call the ideal structure, where the developer raises enough capital, equity, and traditional debt capital to fully complete the project. At the same time, as an upfront measure, they ensure that there's line of sight in terms of sales using the method that you speak of sales plans, right? And in my view, that is an ideal structure because it ensures that, one, the project is fully completed, there's enough capital upfront raised to fully complete the project, but it also helps the developer predict returns in an acceptable level of risk because with off-land sales, you can see, how much you're going to generate once the project is complete. The sort of more second scenario that plays out is very similar to the first one in that total capital is raised from equity and debt, but where developers, because of their conviction of the project, the location, and where they believe the market will play, they take on more speculative risk. In other words, it's a lower level of off-plan sales or no level of off-plan sales. And that presents a lot more risk in predicting returns for equity investors and then predicting repayments for us as lenders. And then the sort of more loss scenario that plays out that we see is where on the capital raising side, you don't lock in all the capital up front, as well as on the sales side, you don't lock in the sales up front, and you sort of mix the two together where some of your funding comes from the off-plan deposits from your purchasers, and that creates significant risk in firstly funding the project completion, but also in predicting your returns and predicting your ability to repay your equity and debt investors. So in the luxury market, yes, as much as these scenarios play out, I think it's best to keep it on the ideal scenario because your market, your target market isn't wide. It was mentioned earlier, isn't a wide market, so you want to predict your returns up front.
It's very interesting. So developers are looking to sort of balance their cash flow availability, but still able to predict at some level the returns on the project. And I think that does tie in with a lot of what we've seen, that in the luxury real estate space, and I think, Human, you'll agree with this, that there tends to be a good uplift of price in between sort of the off-plan stage and the completion stage. And that does reflect in willingness to pay by customers at the end of the project.
Yes,
That was a very leading question. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So in our experience, what we had two batches of buyers really. One was the pre-launch buyers, who came in who I don't want to say either is more sophisticated or maybe one's less suspicious because of their experiences. But so Palm Valley specifically was a unique case. We had won on launch. We had won the International Property Awards for the best residential development in the entire world. So it got a lot of international visibility. We, as a developer company, we're also quite well established. So about 60% of the pre-sales or of the sales came in pre-launch, which was very strong for us and gave us a lot of confidence. And I would say to date, we never had one buyer come and ask for their money back or cancel. We've pushed out several, but we never had anybody come and actually say they're not happy and have to leave. That being said, the kind of interim stage, or what I call the ugly stage while you're developing and making it look nice and pretty, was a little bit slower, although we weren't really very active because we had a strong initial sales support. One mistake we made was then thinking that we didn't need a bank initially. And so, because the pre-sales actually supported the entire project. So we were very fortunate, but that was a mistake. And what happened was that in between any kind of issues with pandemics and changes in the market and just market confidence, which can be completely unrelated to property specifically, can be even in the retail sector or the banking sector, these then had a knock-on effect on not our sales specifically, but people's willingness to pay at that time, and increase the level of excuses significantly. And then what we've seen is then there's a very different level of buyer who's coming in towards the end of the project, cash buyers, very excited, very happy to do the deal very quickly, but they kind of wanted to sit on on a couch in a sample house, look at a fake TV, and then they'll give you their money. So that's kind of how we split the two. We tried actually early on, we invested in virtual reality. We sold one house with virtual reality where somebody put on goggles, walked through it and said, I'll buy it. Interesting. We used augmented reality. We went all the way through this. Honestly, in this market, nothing beats kind of, sitting on that couch and looking at that TV. So, yeah. But in answer to your question, also in terms of pricing, I think we did build enough mechanisms, so we have stabilized our pricing from the point where, actually at pre-launch, we pretty much achieved our target ultimate price, and we've kept it there consistently. So it's more about managing payment plans and also buyer changes and preferences. We didn't really have a very different price. Now that we're completing the project and we have the first residents going in, there are resales that are happening which are slightly higher value, and the minimum, we have less than 5% of our stock remaining. Those we might put up a little bit.
I think your point on clients sometimes wanting to sit on the couch and see the fake TV speaks to Bangwani's point about having to have the hybrid of the off-plan and perhaps the debt fallback position. Bangwani, maybe I'll come back to you on, are you seeing any particular shifts in the developer profile? So Human has spoken about the build-to-sell model. We heard earlier about the build-to-rent model. In your sphere, are you seeing changes in the developer profile? Is there a shift, or is it in its traditional way of build-to-sell?
Yeah, I think definitely there is a shift in that, many years ago, developers, and they were right, that they predicted that the velocity of sales would happen as quickly as they predicted, and even the cash flows that come in from the sales would be as quickly as they predicted. But like he said, factors that are even beyond the control of the developer play a huge role on the buyer's ability to continue sales as quickly as they had predicted. So you do see that developers are changing their consideration on how much to build to sell versus building to rent. And in reality, Kenya, perhaps a little different on the luxury market, but in reality, Kenya is a rental market. Even where you do build to sell, in most cases, those buyers are buying for investment purposes and rent out those units anyway. So I do think there's a shift in consideration by investors and developers, yeah.
Yes, I think that speaks to the earlier statistic we heard about 71%, I think, was the number of renters versus homeowners. I think a big part of the real estate luxury space is a focus on the end user experience, whether that's a tenant or an owner-occupier. Human, you touched on this a little bit earlier about how bringing alive the experience for the resident, for the occupant, is a big part of luxury. So do you want to talk a little bit about how developers are innovating experiences and services for residents, and how that is maybe creating some differentiation in how real estate is being managed going forward?
Yeah, so again, part of our experience is, or our previous development experiences in hospitality, in retail, in spas and gyms, and so and even in co-working. So in creating a residential community, we drew on that, and then actually incorporated as much as we could to create those individual experiences. So we start our house tour for any potential buyer really going through the clubhouse, which we talk about being the heart of the whole community, and it becomes effectively a extension of your own personal house. So it's spaces that you can dine in, that you can entertain. We try and anticipate what would be some of the real actual needs of the homeowners and residents. So a particular one, we created a clubhouse, the library space in the clubhouse, as a co-working space, but also a private meeting space. And we saw quite early on that this spoke very well to the women executives that we have living in the community, women business owners, because they sometimes want spaces that are professional, that are cartoon and child-free. Right? So meeting within a house is sometimes a bit difficult. But then they don't want to be at like Serena Lobby at 6:30 in the evening having a meeting. They want to be within the community, within the estate. They want to be home, right? Effectively, that's home. And it's part of the freedom that was at the core of everything we did, the principle of freedom. So it really, we just saw that resonated very well with certain buyers who like the idea that I actually am being treated like a professional. I'm being considered in terms of my needs as a professional, where I can go and have a meeting at 6 o'clock with my colleague, a banker, a lawyer, take a call without having to deal with, kind of hiding under a couch somewhere in the house. So this is the level of experience that we spend a lot of time thinking about, maybe too much time, but then I think that's ultimately what creates, what is it's actually a hospitality experience within these communities.
I think that's a very, very good point there, because a lot of what sounds like luxury real estate is also speaking to hospitality. And Tejas, that will bring me to you. I think you have a very strong background in hospitality. But as we see the marketing evolve, there's kind of a blurred line now between where residential ends and hospitality starts. And we've seen talk of branded residences and how hospitality experiences are coming into residential real estate. Are you able to tell us a little bit about your experience with branded residences?
Thank you, Farhana. Thank you for having me as part of the session and saving me for the last. You know what they say about the best. I must say that we know for a fact that Kenyans are fast marathon runners, but I think we may have set the record for somebody being part of a panel at the fastest. I was asked to be part of this panel 20 minutes ago, but I promised to add some value. No, relevant question about branded residency. And I think every answer about that question has to be looked upon from the viewpoint of all stakeholders. And the key stakeholders when it comes to branded residential developments tend to be the owner/developer, the brand/operator, the buyer of the individual units, and the homeowners association. So we need to understand the difference between the residency, the traditional residency, and the branded residency for all these stakeholders. And the key differences from our perspective, and just by way of background, we are a hotel advisory practice, so we deal with this on a regular basis. We see a lot of influx and a lot of inquiries around branded residential development, especially in Kenya, and we've seen that traditionally in the Middle East and Europe as well. The first sort of aspect when it comes to the difference is the identity. The identity of a traditional residential development comes from the location, comes from the name, which typically tends to be an obscure Italian word with a vowel at the end, or comes from the reputation of the developer. Not everybody has the same credibility and reputation as Human does, but they provide the identity to projects. Whereas when it comes to branded residencies, the identity is defined by the brand, by people's association with the brand. And typically these brands tends to be international hotel brands that allow branded residential developments as part of a hotel project. So identity is one aspect of it. The difference is value proposition as well. Value for a traditional residential project tends to be again from the location of the project, credibility of the owner, the quality of construction. Branded residential development, because of the association of the brand, has an automatic association with quality, has an automatic association with value proposition as well. Then we talk about services and amenities. Not every residential developer, and you've come across surely a lot of developers that have not necessarily thought of services as Human has for his projects. Whereas when it comes to, so services tend to be limited in a traditional residential development. In a branded residential development, there is a lot of hospitality components added in or weaved into the development as well. The target markets tend to be different as well. For traditional residencies, target market tends to be locally driven. Branded residential, again, with the association with an international brand, tends to attract a lot more international client base as well. You have a global reach because of the association with the brand. And I think just from an investment standpoint, and again, there we look at all the key stakeholders in itself, there is a lot of synergies between these stakeholders to make this a successful investment and a value proposition.
That's very interesting, and I think just following on from an earlier comment about, and I think this is also our experience, that a lot of investors in the residential real estate space are buying to rent. The notion would obviously be that buying into a branded residence versus traditional real estate is going to yield higher ROIs. But there's also a fear, I suppose, that the management costs eat up a lot of the ROIs. Can you speak a little bit to your experience on what the investor can be looking for?
Sure. As I said, there's a lot of synergies for all stakeholders involved. From a buyer standpoint, you typically end up paying anything from a 20 to a 30% premium for buying into a branded residential development. There is an aspirational aspect to be associated with a brand. There is an aspirational or a lifestyle aspect to be staying in an apartment or a villa in a resort development. So you end up paying a lot of premium, but there is a lot of value protection inbuilt in the structure as well. When it comes to reselling of a residential unit, traditional residential unit value is determined by market trends. If you're selling it on a high, you get a good profit out of it. If you're selling with the right brokers, you can make some money out of it as well. Whereas when it comes to branded residential developments, again, because it's associated and because it's aspirational, there is a value protection built in. So that's from a buyer standpoint. From a developer standpoint, branded residential, again, because of the outreach that the brand can have, which is fairly wide, if not global, you are able to tap into a bigger pool of potential buyers. You're able to sell your units a lot better as compared to a traditional residential development as well. Plus, from a cash flow point of view, you are able to yield a lot of cash flow to be able to sustain the construction as well. So good value from a developer point of view, good value from a buyer point of view. From a brand standpoint, I don't know why I'm pointing towards myself, but from a brand standpoint, there is a lot of there's plenty of fees inbuilt in the system as well. So you have typically end up paying a license fee to the brand for that is associated with the sale price of the residential unit. And then for day-to-day operations, there is a management fee involved as well. You could, depending on the negotiations with the brand, you could have exit clauses and exit fees as well linked to it. But that's the revenue model for a brand. So different stakeholders, and from a homeowners association point of view, I guess lastly, I think the value of being part of a community that is well run, well managed, serviced well, and has the right amenities to be a more attractive destination for future buyers is already inbuilt value in this system.
That's very good, and I think I did hear a lot about quality build in that and the need for having quality build in order to actualize some of these yields. Gurmukh, maybe I can ask you, looking at the East African market, we are still seeing sort of developments falling short of certain standards, and then obviously they would struggle to command some of these premium yields we're looking for. So what strategic measures do you think developers can take in order to de-risk some of these quality aspects and ensure value going forward?
This is a very valid, very important point actually. It starts right from, especially for luxury development, starts right from the land selection and the location. So that has to be ideal. You can't just build everywhere and call it luxury and it'll be luxury. No, it can't. the land size has to be correct, the kind of development, the density as well can't be over-densified because you need to provide all these amenities. That's one. Number two, from a compliance point of view, you need to basically work with registered professionals. You can go to Borax, EBK websites, check whether your professionals are registered. Make sure you're following all the compliance checklists locally. Do your due diligence, because what happens is when you're approaching DFIs or other banks or other partners for finance, they will request this, and it helps de-risk your development. Not only that, but also it de-risks yourself as a developer, because what happens is a lot of the time working with professionals ensures that the liability is kind of on them. When you're working with people who are not registered, the liability falls solely with the developer. So it's an important note as well. Number two, it would be standards. So the finishing, the quality of documentation that you're getting, specifications should be, especially for high-end developments, actually every development should be international standard. So you should expect thorough documentation from all your consultants. Implementation should be to the highest standard. Waterproofing in your bathrooms, good insulations, making sure your tiles are not popping out, your paint is properly done, your sealants are properly done, all of that. All of that adds value, reduces your maintenance costs, and kind of attracts a higher sale value or rental value down the line.
Well, that's excellent. I think going into the future, then standards resonates quite strongly in terms of building for the future. I know I'm out of time, but my closing question, and I'll just open this up to anyone on the panel. We've heard a lot about the growing population in Africa. We're very cognizant of foreign investment, diaspora presence. Where do we see and how do we see the influence of foreign investors and the diaspora in taking the luxury real estate market forward? Any takers?
I can just give a little bit about my experience, which is that what we're seeing more and more is that the Kenyan diaspora, which is very strong, very active, more and more they're looking for homes not only as a good investment, but also as something that they can be proud to come back and live in. And so they are equally discerning as the foreign investors. We're probably at about 20% of our buyers as foreign investors. Some of them we've never ever met. Kenya is actually actively on the international scene. It's being watched very closely. We found that with local properties and developments gaining a little bit more attention through things like these international property awards, API awards, that more and more people are paying attention to the quality and the design, because we have the best climate, we're getting better infrastructure, Kenya is becoming substantially more livable, and actually is making a name for itself, Nairobi specifically, as a strong investment market. And so for the foreign investors, and foreign, by the way, we had a significant number of African buyers that came through in our projects at the end, because more and more they are seeing Nairobi as their long-term solution. Right? They're maybe not so sure about their investments or their future livability of some of the surrounding countries, but because of the schools, the healthcare, again the communities, Nairobi is becoming the Dubai of, I would say, East and Central Africa in that respect.
Thank you, Human. I think that was a very good way to wrap up the panel. My apologies for the slight overrun. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you.